they started to look at what radio waves are coming from space. And that was very interesting because it was just something very different to see, not just the visible light, but radio waves, and what might you find there. So she had the job not only of setting that up with a bunch of students, which she did, but then she was also looking through the data, and it was a very tedious process. And we have here on the left a small sample of what her data looked like. So it was, when you think of an earthquake disaster movie, you have these old school seismographic devices where a needle is moving over paper, and then when the earthquake happens, the needle goes crazy and it paints all over the paper. Well, it worked similarly to that. So you would really have strips of paper that came to be very long if you took long measurements, and she literally had hundreds of meters of this paper to look through and look through the signals for what she was trying to research. She was trying to find out how different types of galaxies relate to each other. But what she then found was something she didn't expect, and it's kind of difficult to see, but you have these dips here, like dit, 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 dit. And this was a signal that was so regular that it was absolutely confusing to her and to everybody who looked at it. And they were trying to find out what made the signal. Now, because it's very regular and because it's a radio signal, it makes you think of something like a radio station, maybe a radar thing, maybe something the military does, maybe a satellite giving off some signal. But she found out that the signal came back in time exactly as the stars move across the sky. So it couldn't be a satellite. They tried to find out if there was some radio station playing tricks somewhere, if the military was doing something, but one by one they ruled out all the obvious possibilities of what the source of this signal could be. And what remained after a couple of weeks of really looking at, like I said, hundreds of meters of this data, they concluded that it had to be an astronomical source, something that really was in the sky. Well, they concluded that it really was, and it turned out that she had found the first pulsar, and it sounds even cooler if I say she had observed the first ever neutron star. A neutron star is something that people back then didn't really believe might exist. It sort of existed in the calculations of physics, but to really find an object like this was truly remarkable, because it's something that remains when a star collapses at the end of its life and perishes in a big violent reaction. And a neutron star is something that, after a supernova explosion, for example, might be the remains of a star like that, and it can give off radio signals in this way. Now, this became super famous. This is an album cover of a well, I'm too young to really know it, but it's apparently a famous album cover of a famous album. And it shows the same signals that were measured here from this very pulsar. So this was a truly remarkable thing. Now, Jocelyn Bell Burnell finished her PhD thesis. She wrote everything down that she had been researching. The discovery of the pulsar was an appendix then, something to add. And the Nobel Prize was given to her boss. Yeah. People back then didn't think that was a big deal because, well, if you are the main researcher, you get the credit, you have the responsibility, you are responsible for the money and everything, so most people thought it was fair that Anthony Hewish, her boss, would get the Nobel Prize. But to some, it didn't seem fair. Some people, even back then in the astrophysical community, said, no, she was doing all the work, she had set up the experiment, she had analyzed the data, she had, ruled out all these other possibilities for what the source might be, and they thought it wasn't fair. Now, Jocelyn Bell Burnell herself today has become a very respected astrophysicist. She has received many other awards, and her work is well known and well respected. And back in the days, just a few years after this Nobel Prize was awarded, she said that it's kind of the normal way that things go, right? I mean, someone is doing the grunt work, and others get the fame. That's kind of how it works in the natural sciences. But later she became a bit more outspoken about the position of women in science. She said that she didn't believe women had the responsibility to adapt to how the system worked, but that society and the scientific community had to adapt more towards women, and that would give a good result in general to everyone. And she's not bitter, she's not upset or angry about this. She just continues to continues to do work and to encourage young people to enter into astrophysics. And she says that she hopes that young people, young women, will find astrophysics as a field where they are welcome and where their achievements are readily recognized. So that's the story of Jocelyn Bell Burnell and the discovery of the pulsars. And now we make a little break and go into astronautics, so to speak of people who go in space. And if I had really known that you would still be here, you will get to tell me if I'm being accurate. So people who go to space, about 360, 370 people have been in space, and among them are more or less 40 women. So it's just a bit more than 10% of all the people who've gone to space that are women. And here we see a picture of a couple of them. Now, the first woman to ever go into space was Valentina Tereshkova, and this was at the beginning of the 60s, during a time where the two superpowers of the Soviet Union and the United States were kind of racing for first times. Okay, so you get the first person into space. Okay, you get the first docking in space. You get the first spacewalk. You get the first time two people are in space at the same time, and you get a woman. And the Soviet Union won that one. They had the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, but then when they had done that, the interest kind of went away, because by the time the second woman flew into space, almost 20 years had passed. It was only in the beginning of the 80s that the Soviet Union sent up another woman, and then the third to go into space was Sally Ride, the first American to ever go into space. And then I've selected a couple more pictures. Helen Sharman was the first European woman to go into space from the United Kingdom. She went in the beginning of the 90s, and the first East Asian woman was Chiaki Mukai from Japan, who went in the end of the 90s. And while women only have a small part in the number of astronauts that go up, they sadly had to take the full share of the dangers and the risks of spaceflight, because Judith Resnick and Krista McAuliffe died along with 5 of their colleagues when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded in the year 1986. And Kalpana Chawla and Laurel Clark died in the Columbia disaster of 2003. So they had their share in that, and that is how astronautics go. But if we look at the present, then we see a brighter picture and a larger number of women doing a job. Now, if aliens were to arrive on Earth, and they want to speak to the coolest person on Earth, they might look to the commander of the International Space Station, because that would make sense that this would be the coolest person on Earth, and they would talk to Peggy Whitson, who is right at this moment on the International Space Station with a number of colleagues, and she's commanding the International Space Station, so looks like a pretty cool representation for humanity there. And these are the 4 youngest active astronauts. I think Kathryn Rubins maybe has not had a flight yet, but these 4 women are born in 1977 or 1978. So they are just 10 years older than me, myself. And here we have the first Chinese woman that ever went into space, the first person from Korea, Samantha Cristoforetti, who was the first Italian woman to go into space, and Kathryn Rubins from NASA. And I'd just like to show you a few more pictures of what Samantha Cristoforetti has been doing on the International Space Station, because I think she's been doing some amazing work. Here we have her demonstrating the sleeping bags, how you sleep on the International Space Station. And this is where she dressed up as Captain Kathryn Janeway from Star Trek Voyager, and points at a freighter, a Dragon capsule that is about to dock with the International Space Station. And the statement that she released together with this picture was that my sensors show that there is coffee in this object, because then she installed the first ever espresso machine on the International Space Station, which she said that for her as a person from Italy was very important to have good coffee. And so she brought and made and drank the first espresso in space. And to kind of wrap this up is to say that at the moment the proportion of women in spaceflight is still not very large. Of the, I think, 15 or 20 active European Space Agency astronauts, only Samantha Cristoforetti is active at the moment. NASA has a bit better ratio. They just named a couple, I think 6 or 8 new astronauts, and actually half of them are women. So it's moving in the right direction in that sense. And I just like to think that if this is the future of, a part of the future of spaceflight, I think we're kind of on the right track. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be taking questions if you like.
Is there any questions?
Yep, up there. You'll get a microphone so everyone can hear.
Well, I just would like to know if you consider that women in space can give to the astrophysics science a different perspective than what men can bring, to science.
Well, I think good scientists are good scientists, and it's not the first important thing whether you're a woman or a man. But like Jocelyn Bernal pointed out, that you have this very competitive atmosphere where you try to be better than your colleagues and maybe trick somebody and maybe be more confrontative than really cooperative. And maybe if the system of how science is rewarding and how maybe money is awarded in science, if that moves more towards an environment where women can feel welcome, for one, and B, flourish to be good scientists and to be successful in a system like that, then I would also think that that would probably make science better. Yeah. Okay. If there's no more questions, then thank you very much. Enjoy your evening, and thanks for listening.
Yes, and as a ISWI member, I would like to thank you for coming here to Ermenau and for rounding up a little bit the whole event here. And therefore, we would like to thank you a bit. Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right.
You're welcome. And thank you to you too as well. And the next...